There's a man in front of me, standing on a fence, in tights. He wants to play a game.
Let's play a game! When my hands go up, you're gonna get loud, and when they go down, you're gonna get quiet. Make sense? All right. Very good.
Behind the man in tights, a band of horns play music as men mounted on horseback gallop into a pen. The crowd erupts, cheering on their favorite knights wielding spears. Jousting is about to begin. The sounds you are hearing are coming from last year's Maryland Annapolis Renaissance Fair. My first Ren Fair, and certainly not my last. It was fascinating seeing thousands of people dressed up, perusing the fairgrounds, shooting bow and arrows, eating turkey legs, drinking mead, walking on stilts, dancing, and selling anything and everything medieval to one another. It left me thinking, what are the risks behind Renaissance fairs? And who on earth would insure them? Welcome to the Leader's Edge podcast. I'm Zach Ewell, market analyst and podcast producer at Leader's Edge. In this episode, we'll be taking a look at the risks that performers and vendors face at Renaissance fairs, and meet some of the talented and unique people who insure them. But first, some background. The first Renaissance Fair in America was held in Los Angeles, California, in 1963. An indirect product of the Red Scare, Cold War era, the fair was made up of unemployed creatives who had been largely blacklisted in Hollywood for their left-leaning political beliefs, according to the Smithsonian Magazine. Fast forward today, and there are currently over 200 Renaissance fairs that take place every year across America, according to History.com. So then, for those who don't know, what makes Ren fairs so different from theme parks such as Disneyland? According to Chicago Sun-Times columnist Neil Steinberg, quote, if theme parks with their pasteboard main streets week of bland, safe, homogenized, white bread America, the Renaissance Fair is at the other end of the social spectrum. A whiff of the occult, a flash of danger, and a hint of the erotic, end quote. In my experience, the Ren Fair I visited was more packed with personality than any theme park I had ever been to. Edgier and more immersive, performers and guests alike were encouraged to interact with each other in live-action roleplay. While Ren fairs hold many differences from theme parks, the large sum of revenue generated by them is a major factor they have in common. And while there's no industry average for profit made at Ren fairs, they can reportedly earn over $21 million in revenue annually. This revenue can be generated from ticket sales, performances, parking fees, and food, beverages, and souvenir vending.
The Ren Fair isn't just one business. It's a temporary village made up of many independent operations. Part historical reenactment, part fantasy world, and part community celebration.
That's Libby Ohm, Communications and Marketing Manager at Specialty Insurance Agency. She's been helping performers and vendors that operate at Ren fairs acquire policies to protect them from liabilities for nearly 5 years now.
So the guests range widely. Some come in full period costumes while others show up in jeans and a t-shirt. Artisan crafters sell handmade goods like leather armor, swords, flower crowns, corsets, pottery. The list goes on. And all of that is what makes Ren Fair so impressive. They look chaotic and whimsical, but they only work because there's a lot of intentional risk management that's supporting that magic.
When it comes to risk management that supports the ecosystem of Renaissance fairs, Libby explained that two main groups take out policies. First, the event organizer and event producer in charge of the fair as a whole. Next, you have performers and vendors, who are often independent contractors and not employees of the fair.
So at the top, you have the event organizer and fair producer. They're responsible for the overall site, infrastructure, and public safety. They often need to carry commercial general liability or CGL coverage, but they may also need property insurance, inland marine, workers' comp, event cancellation / weather insurance, liquor liability, and or umbrella / excess coverage. But that truly varies from fair to fair. And then the next step down would be performers and vendors. So those who are booked at the fairs are typically independent contractors, not employees of the fair. So usually they need their own coverage for CGL as well, the commercial general liability policy. The industry standard for events is pretty much 1 million per occurrence with 2 million for the general aggregate. And we see that's pretty common with the Ren fairs as well, but there are some that do require higher coverage, like a 2 million per occurrence, 4 million general aggregate policy. In addition, they likely will need to provide a COI naming the Ren Fair as additional insured, which then protects the fair should they get sued for something one of the independent contractors did. But for performers, the risks are often physical or occupational. So acts often involve fire, weapons, animals, heights, repetitive motion. Then you add in long days, heat, and heavy costumes, uneven ground. The exposure just increases with all of that. Then you have your vendors and small businesses. The risk often comes from their operations. So hot surfaces, grease fires, food safety concerns, tents and displays that are out in the wind or rain, and large crowds moving through tight spaces. So as I previously mentioned, there are wooden structures at these Ren fairs. So that also adds a layer for fire and property exposure. Then a combined risk for our performers and vendors is injuring a spectator or a customer. Say a vendor spills hot coffee on a patron, burns their skin, and then that patron sues. Liability policies should cover any claim where a third party is injured or the property is damaged by the performer or vendor. The key thing is that everyone has a role to play. And when insurance is layered properly, it protects not only the fair, but the performers, vendors, and ultimately the guests.
Libby then gives us a glimpse of what types of claims are most common for her firm's clients at Renaissance fairs.
I would say, honestly, most of our claims are inland marine claims. So somebody's property was damaged or stolen. Those are probably the most typical. We do have a few Ren Fair claims. We had one person, a vendor, a beverage vendor, who was setting up shop. Their particular space had this garage door that could open and close for when they were open for business, closed for business. And while our vendor was setting up, she noticed that the garage door was faulty and would just fall on its own accord. So she told the fair manager, a few other personnel, and unfortunately, with the chaos of trying to get the fair open, the garage door wasn't fixed. So we can probably guess what happens there. The garage door unfortunately did fall on a patron's head, and that patron did sue the fair. Now, this particular fair required not only a COI, but the primary non-contributory endorsement and the waiver of subrogation. So while our lawyers initially tried to have some of the responsibility passed to the fair because it was their door that wasn't fixed, because of the endorsements, we paid out that whole claim. It's really just fluke, weird things that come in as claims, but primarily they are for inland marine, not that, a fire performer lit somebody on fire or anything like that.
I use fire swords, fire devil sticks or crystal sticks. For poi, for instance, that's a chain with a ball on the end, and the ball is made of Kevlar wicking that you dip in an accelerant, you light, and then you spin in a controlled fashion to create your dangerously beautiful spectacle, your performance. When you're performing, the sound of the fire is so loud, so it's very immersive, like these aspects you don't think of when you're just watching it come into play as well. So it really feels like you're kind of flying with the apparatus. It's one of my favorite things to do.
That's Ariel Begley, a pyrotechnic fire performer who performs at Renaissance fairs. She's also acted, juggled, and walked on stilts. With all of these skill sets, Ariel also faces a wide range of hazards. She shared with me what common aspects she considers when assessing her risks as a performer.
One of the things I always like to think about when assessing my risks is to ask yourself or ask the performers if their ability to communicate, to move, or to see is impaired, and to make sure that then you're accommodating that. So, for example, a stilt walker has, limited mobility. They can't reach down. They've got stilts. they can still communicate. They can potentially still see well. If they're wearing a mask, then there might be some impairment there. Those kinds of scenarios, maybe an assistant who's a spotter who can be available, or a secondary performer. For example, big dinosaur costumes or mascots. Sometimes they have a handler, and that person is there just to help manage them walking through spaces so they're not damaging the property.
As I continued to chat with Ariel about her decades-long profession as an entertainer, I was surprised to learn she began her career when she was only 2 years old, as a mime, a part of her family's mime troupe. You grew up in a mime troupe?
That's right.
Tell me about that experience.
Me and my two big brothers, we grew up performing mime. We grew up traveling and doing events across the Midwest primarily, but we certainly toured kind of all over. As my brothers got older, they decided to kind of move on and maybe not do mime. That wasn't the cool thing for the middle school kids to brag about. But I stuck with it. My parents were happy to let us make those choices as we got older. They would make jokes, actually, as a child about, Ariel, when you get older, if you want to become a doctor or an insurance agent, we'll still love you. Like, kind of flipping that on its head and making a joke of those kind of standard career paths being the unusual choice in my family.
From growing up a mime to pursuing a career in performing arts where Ariel would eventually land gigs at Ren fairs, she would not grow up to become a doctor, but she would grow up to work in insurance as an agency manager at Specialty Insurance Agency.
I just really enjoy being able to work with performers across the nation and, supporting their needs. And, I'm also a fire performer. And so I'm one of the agents on staff who can speak to those fire performers. You don't have to explain the prop. I know what that is. Here's how this works. And yeah, it can be really amazing when you're speaking with a client that you can speak their language, that artist language, and say, yep, I understand, we'll help you with the insurance side. You do the artistry and let's work together to make sure you're doing it safely.
As it turns out, Ariel isn't the only one who has a performing background at Specialty Insurance Agency.
I was in the circus for 13 years. When I was 4 years old, I attended a local circus show to watch my brother's best friend at the time perform. During that performance, an Ariel appeared, and she was about 20 feet in the air. And I looked over to my mom and I said, I want to be up there. I trained extensively in various aerial acts, theater, contortion, hand balancing, dance, kind of all different areas. I always like to tell people that I didn't have to run away to join the circus. My mom drove me there and home every day until I was old enough to drive myself. So I loved being a circus performer, but over time it took a toll on my body. I injured my back when I was 17, and by 19, I just couldn't keep performing in the circus arts. And while I loved all of the people and the community, I never really felt like working at the circus was going to be my career. I always knew it was a stepping stone. Enter Heather Zenzen, Specialty Insurance Agency, or SIA's current president. This wasn't your typical insurance agency. It's advocacy, education, and protection for people that I already understood. Like, this is my forever job, and that's a really cool feeling.
While talking to Libby and Ariel, it became apparent that many people who work at their insurance agency were performers and artists in their past careers. In fact, their company, as it turns out, was founded by a Santa Claus and a clown.
We were created by Heather's grandfather. He was insurance agent by day, but was a circus clown in his free time, and Santa Claus. So back in 1992, they started asking him for proof of insurance, and that wasn't widely available. So he literally just created a policy for him and his clown friends, and that's how our whole agency got started.
From circus clowns to court jesters and medieval kings, the popularity and profits that drive the business of Renaissance fairs only continues to grow in America. And with that, so does the adoption of insurance coverage. However, Libby shares that there can be some growing pains when it comes to policy adoption.
The growth has primarily meant kind of two things for us right now, and that would be, first is insurance is becoming a standard part of doing business at Ren fairs. With more Ren fairs and requiring coverage, naturally, that has increased the number of people coming to us for said coverage. And then second is education. It's become more important than ever, and we spend a lot of time working with fairs to get them to help set reasonable requirements. And then we also help our clients to understand how to better protect themselves without pricing themselves out of work, or even sometimes simply explaining what the coverage is, because we do have a lot of new people coming who, it's their first Ren fair, or it's the first time that Ren fair is requiring insurance. We get a lot of calls of, I've been doing this for 20 years and I've never needed insurance before. So just a lot of education, because there is a lot of common misconceptions out there. So the education piece has been really huge. Mm-hmm. But overall, the growth is definitely really exciting. And it's also reinforced something important, and that is the magic of Ren fairs only exists when there's a strong, thoughtful foundation underneath it. And insurance is a quiet piece of that foundation, but it does play a huge role in keeping these spaces creative, fun, safe, and sustainable.
And when Ariel's not assisting policyholders, she continues to perform. She shares that working in the industry of risk and performance has made her look at Renaissance fairs differently.
As a patron, it has. It's actually been a very big difference when I'm just going to be someone watching, because I immediately am thinking about all of the hazards and the risks and assessing where those might be. And I wonder how the performer's handling that, or have they noticed that? In my performance work, which I continue to do, it actually hasn't really made any difference because of that same conversation. I engage in dangerous spectacle that comes with inherent risks, and part of being a professional in this is making sure you're addressing those. So it's informed some more knowledge. I definitely think about it more when I'm watching performances or coming just as an audience member. And I've been kind of pleasantly surprised and reassured that as a performer, those are all necessary pieces of how you look at the work.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Leader's Edge podcast. For more podcasts, please subscribe or go to leadersedge.com.